I'ma just walk away, it's the end.
Testing? Great. Wow, look at this room. Thanks for having me here, everyone. It's great to be in Salt Lake City. I came just over from Colorado where it was hailing right when I left, so loving this weather right now and being able to escape for a while. My name is Catherine, and today I'll be talking to you guys about pricing and all the terrible, terrible mistakes I've made while trying to figure it out so that you don't have to hopefully go through that process either. Is this working? Let's make sure that this is syncing up. Oh, there it is. Cool. So the framework and case study that I'm going to go through today comes from my current role at FullContact, which is a company that makes contact management apps as well as does identity data solutions for professionals, for businesses, and now for teams. The product that I'm going to talk about today is FullContact for Teams, which is a SaaS application for teams to share contacts that we developed just about 1.5 years ago and really started prototyping. So this is a very recent example that I'll be sharing with you guys. And what I'll be going over is all the different implementations of pricing that we tried out as we were trying to get to product market fit, as well as verifying that this was actually a product that people were willing to pay money to use. And in my spare time, I also write a little bit on product management, so you can always find me at this handle on these social networks. Looks like I have a bit of a lag, so we'll just spend a few seconds waiting for it every time. Here. Sorry, guys. I'm just going to do this. Oh, maybe it's the internet. All right, we're going to roll with it. Here we go. So this stat from Price Intelligently is pretty astounding. The average company spends only 6 hours in its entire lifetime thinking about pricing. And it's insane because pricing is the first impression that anyone gets of your product. And it affects all of us in this room because no matter how good your product is or how good the design and the UX of it is, if your pricing is off, then it could turn people away before they even get to try it. This is just a recent example that I'm sure many of you guys have heard of in the recent past. So Juicero is this company that created a really great juicer for making cold-pressed juice at home. And what they actually did was priced their product based on the cost of R&D as well as the cost of the materials. So you can see here that they originally priced at $700. Now, when you think of it as a consumer and what we're willing to pay for a cup of juice, $700 doesn't really match up to the value that we place on just a cup of juice. So that's why you see all of these different headlines here where people were appalled at the pricing. And this is the state that we really don't want to be in. We don't want to put a price out there that we haven't really tested, that we don't know how people are going to react to, because this is literally the worst case scenario for most of us in this room, I'm betting. So what makes it so that companies spend so little time on pricing? I polled a bunch of different product managers at different companies about why pricing scared them so much. And the resounding reason that came out was that there are so many different inputs that go into pricing that it can become overwhelming. And what we learn when we start looking at pricing is that it's not just a math problem that you can figure out in Excel or write a formula for. It's actually sitting at the intersection of psychology and economics and marketing and finance and even UX as you're designing your pricing plan pages. And having to learn all of this at once and being able to understand the consequences of what happens when you set your price makes it so that many people fall into a state of anxiety and despair and then go into their heads and freak out, and that's where we end up. So when you really think about all of the things that are going into this, it's this underlying fear of making a mistake when we're putting out a pricing that really drives this anxiety behind the process of setting pricing itself. And it's really interesting because when we started breaking down what was actually causing people, there we go. What was actually causing people to be afraid, it came out to a couple different components that I wrote down here for you guys. And when you really break it down, every single one of these fears is an overall fear of the unknown. For example, we don't know what's going to happen if we just go with a cost-based pricing or if we go with our gut price. It could end up super badly if the value that your customers place on your actual product doesn't match up with the price that you've put out there. If we go with a freemium pricing model, the fear there is that we may never get feedback in time and we'll just run out of money before people actually start paying and before we really figure that out. If we ask users directly what they're willing to pay, all of you guys in this room probably know this, but no one actually knows exactly what they're willing to pay, so you really can't trust the voice of a user in this case when they're talking about pricing. And then also, having features in the wrong plan causes a fear in not knowing what features our users are actually valuing, and that causes the potential for the right features to be put in the wrong plan and people to purchase something that you don't want them to. And then the last fear that kind of overarches all of this is the fear of not being able to test pricing. And the really good thing about the age that we're in now is we have all of the tools and all of the infrastructure to finally really be able to change our pricing really rapidly and make mistakes and learn from that in the just workplace trends that are happening right now in tech. So what I'll do today is cover each of these fears and go over different lightweight ways that you can test them out, and a lot of them you can actually test out without even involving your engineers. So this is really good because you're just isolating yourself and doing a lot of the work yourself before asking your engineers to build something. So the approach today that we're going to go through is, yes, to de-risk pricing as much as you can by breaking all of the pricing problems that we have into little components that are testable and easy to learn from. So the overarching goal of the pricing framework that I'm going to give you guys today is to really just uncover your users' willingness to pay. And when I talk about willingness to pay, I don't just mean finding a price that gets all of your users to pay. I mean setting a price that you and your company are actually comfortable with that fit your willingness to lose a couple potential customers if they don't like the price, but actually sit at a good spot or a good range to capture the customer number that you want. And you'll probably notice that this framework is very similar to the framework for running an experiment in general. So what I'll do today is go through this framework, but really customize it for testing out different things about pricing. So the first part of this is setting your hypothesis. And arguably, this is the most important part of the entire process, because if you don't have a strong hypothesis, if you don't have one that's easily testable or easily validated or invalidated, your results are going to be harder to find, and they may not be as strong or as actionable as you need them to be, especially if you're a little bit short on time, you need to test something out really quick, then I would recommend that you're going with very aggressive hypotheses to really invalidate things quickly. And the great thing about the hypotheses that you can set up is that they also break down into components that are also easily testable. So really, we're breaking pricing down into all these tiny little things that you can test and learn from very, very quickly. And here I just wrote down that our goal here with our hypotheses is to optimize for the speed of learning. So you want to get these going, learn from them, and move on to the next thing. So the first part that I'll go over is the unit and cost per unit. Most of you in this room have probably heard of most of these different value metrics that are being used for pricing. This study from OpenView Partners that was done back in March shows that the per-seat pricing that we're all really used to has started decreasing in favor of companies who are really now experimenting more with their value metric and trying out different ones that better map to the value they provide for their users. And a really good rule of thumb to remember here is to make sure that your value metric is set in a way that as your customers grow, you're also growing along with them. Because nothing's worse than seeing all your customers become super successful and you're just sitting there watching them pay the same amount for your product that they did when they were young. The main point of this slide is to really just show that there are tons of different value metrics that you can set from your product and still have a very successful business. The per-seat model does still dominate, but very quickly we're starting to see a lot of companies that have tried other models and had them work out really well. Now, when you're setting your actual price per unit, it's actually a little bit more scientific, and you may feel more comfortable with this because there's a set process that you probably already go through already. The first one is to, of course, look at your current product line. So you want to make sure that when you're pricing your product, it actually conveys the right value in relation to all the other products that you have on the market. The second thing that you guys all know is to look at your competitors, check out what they're pricing their products at, and then make a strategic decision about whether you want your price to be the same, strategically lower, or strategically higher than theirs. Then the last part of the mix when considering your cost per unit is going to be looking at the market. And what I mean by this is actually looking at your target market or your target customer and seeing what other products they're also purchasing. So for example, for FullContact for Teams, what we did was looked at our ideal team. And these are small, medium businesses. They're groups of 5 people or less. They're working in professional services, potentially VC, potentially marketing agencies, and a couple others. And when we looked at what else they were purchasing, it was a lot of SaaS tools like G Suite, which is basically the Google Apps for business. They're purchasing Slack. They're purchasing email marketing tools like MailChimp. They're purchasing small CRMs like Pipedrive. And so we knew that there were all of these prices that they were already paying for their products, and we could fit our product in there in terms of the value that it would provide for these teams. So that's where you get your hypothesis from. You can look at different companies to find out your unit, and then also look at the wider market to set your cost per unit. And once you have that, there's this really awesome method of testing out that specific price with your users. And it's called the Van Westendorp Price Sensitivity Meter. And if you guys follow Price Intelligently at all, they're one of my favorite pricing blogs. They talk about these 4 survey questions a lot. And really what you do when you answer this is you'll notice that none of these questions actually ask a user exactly what they're willing to pay. Questions actually just try and get them into a range of what they would consider when they're looking at your product price. And the really great thing is once you have the answers to those questions, you can actually plot them out on this graph, and wherever the lines intersect, you're going to get a price range of the lowest and the highest value that the users you surveyed are going to be willing to pay for your product, as well as an optimum price point. So the caveat here that you guys probably notice is that you have to pick your users that you're surveying very wisely and making sure that they are actually your target market. So the next component of a hypothesis is going to be choosing your pricing model. These 2 are the most common among tech today, so I'm just focusing on them. This quote that I found on the internet somewhere is one of my favorite ways to distinguish between freemium and premium. And the real difference here for us is the speed at which you're learning from the decisions that a customer is making. So these really cover the sacrifice that a customer makes in order to use your product. So for a freemium product, you can learn very quickly that someone's willing to spend a few minutes using your product. But for a premium product, you can learn that someone decided it was actually worth money to continue access to your product. So the thing that I'll mention here is that freemium is a harder plan to start with because you'll gain a lot of users that you'll have to eat the costs for in terms of hosting and anything else if you're collecting their data. And they may not make their purchase decision in a time frame that you're comfortable with. So for freemium, you have to be okay with users choosing to pay you whenever they want. Whereas with premium, a lot of companies will put in a trial model which sets an arbitrary time limit in which a user must make a decision about whether or not they want to purchase the product. So in the premium model, it is much easier to get consistent feedback over time as to whether or not people will pay. But overall, these two models, both of them will work well, and you can optimize them to gain feedback very quickly. It just depends on your company's strategy in terms of getting users. Just to illustrate my point, you can have very similar products with totally different pricing models. For example, Evernote here, we all probably know, and I'm guessing that only a few of us in this room, if any, pay for it, versus Ulysses, which is a premium product. Both of them are apps that let you take notes and access them on web and mobile, but they have vastly different pricing models. And it totally depends on the company and what their strategy is. So the third part of a hypothesis is going to be picking your plans and packaging. So that involves knowing which features are the most important to your users and placing those features accurately in the plan that you want people to purchase. So there are two really good ways to just quickly survey your users again and find out how they actually value your features. And they're called trade-off feature analysis as well as conjoint analysis. And both of these survey methods are set so that they force your users to rank your features in terms of what's most important to them. So the data you get from that can really inform your hypotheses about what your customers are really going to pay for and where to put these calls to actions for them to pay within your product. So let's go back to our fears. We've covered a bunch of them in really lightweight methods that you could go ahead and do yourself, which is really awesome because you could be learning and going through this process and come out with a very data-driven hypothesis that you then go and implement to test with users. But going with gut feeling and not knowing how users will react can be addressed with a bit of hypothesis research. So looking at the market, looking at your competitors, and just saying like, hey, where does my supposed price fall among them? What do I think my target customers will think when they look at this price? Having a freemium pricing model and not really knowing when people will pay or whether they'll ever pay can be managed by adding a lot of feature gates, and probably more than you would normally, because these will teach you where people are running into them the most, as well as where people are upgrading the most. So add in more than you normally would, and add in, force people to make a decision at a couple different points in the app. Asking users whether or not they're willing to pay can be gotten around by using those 4 Van Westendorp questions to make sure you get a range instead of an exact price point, because that exact price point is probably not going to be accurate. And then having features in the wrong plan can be found out through using the feature trade-off analysis and conjoint analysis to help you figure out, hey, are the features that I think are valuable in the right plan that I want people to purchase? So already we've gotten through a couple different methods that will take you a few days at most to get done yourself, which is so awesome because you can cycle on this and really iterate on pricing by yourself without involving other people right away. Now that we have a hypothesis, the next step is to actually go ahead and implement it. So I won't spend too much time on this because this really just depends on the tech stack that you have and the infrastructure that you have to do this, but the two basic needs that you're going to have are one, a system that can actually deliver different prices to users and let users purchase your product at those prices, and two, analytics and reporting for you to figure out which gates users are upgrading at, as well as reporting on the prices that they're buying the most at. So the third step in our hypothesis testing is going to be to force users to make a decision. And I can't stress this enough, because if you can force them to make a decision, then you can learn faster and move on to the next experiment if you find that people are deciding not to pay based on your current hypothesis. And much like what I said about the freemium and premium models, these are two ways out of a lot that are probably on the internet for different ways to add in gates that force users to make decisions at different points in your product. And then the fourth step that we all should do, and is probably the second most important after setting a hypothesis, is actually figuring out why users aren't paying if they don't pay. So this is incredibly important, because the things you find out from their anecdotes can be, one, maybe you don't have enough features, and so this dictates your feature roadmap for the next amount of time. Maybe you've set the wrong price, and the price should actually be lower or higher, depending on what they want. They may think that your product is too cheap and they don't trust it. And the last thing that you'll find out as well is what was it? Oh, your users may be totally wrong as well. So a segment of your users may actually be paying, and that might be the segment that you want to switch to. So figuring out why people aren't paying is super helpful for just teaching you what's going on with your product, what people are thinking, and then where you can go in the future. And you don't have to ask like these people here, but it's funny. So don't take it too personally when people say that they're not paying. And definitely feel free to reach out to your customers, because most people are just really willing to give feedback and help you out on your journey. Cool. So this is the part where I talk about all the mistakes I've made while figuring out our pricing for FullContact for Teams. Just as a little bit of background, I guess, we started prototyping this product 1.5 years ago, and it was just 2 engineers in a room trying to figure out what this would look like. And basically, what Teams is a way for teams to share contacts with each other. And it sounds like a very simple concept, but when we started looking at the problem, it was a very painful problem for teams. Because when you look at each of us individually, we all have this contact problem where our contacts are scattered across different devices. So they might be on your phone or your tablet or your computer. And they can also be scattered across different accounts like Facebook and LinkedIn and all of your different email addresses that you've had since you were in middle school. So all of these contacts are just slowly getting out of date and just scattered around. And when you think about that product or problem for Teams, it's actually even worse, because Teams contacts are also stored in different SaaS applications, like an email marketing tool or a CRM or even a spreadsheet. And so our hypothesis is that we are solving a pretty painful problem for Teams. And over the course of that 1.5 years, we really just tried out so many different things, and at the end, really got to a place where we found our target market. We found a problem that was really people were very willing to pay for. And now our product looks like this. So this is the current state. You can obviously tell that's been given some marketing and design love. We've got a beautiful row of stock photos. They're very diverse for today's day and age. And it definitely did not look like that 1.5 years ago. So this is the prototype we started out with, and it was probably worse. Like, this is the earliest I could find. But you can definitely tell that we didn't care about design. We just cared about getting something out there that we could really test with potential users and figure out if this was a problem worth solving. So this graph is to show you guys that I actually think I know what I'm talking about. This is really the paid Teams growth for us over time as we tested out a ton of different hypotheses and different pricing models. So I'll go over all of the different hypotheses that I tried out today, but the point I want to make here is that pricing is not something that you just throw out there and it's perfect. It's this process where you may be wrong half the time, but sometimes you get wins and you just slowly learn and grow from that until you get to a place that you're comfortable with. The way that my team operated was inspired by this quote from Paul Graham as well. So what we did was built a pricing system that was super lightweight, and we told ourselves beforehand that this was probably throwaway code. So once we did that, and once we were able to test out pricing without committing to anything, and without putting a ton of resources into anything, it was so much easier to decide, hey, this isn't working, let's move on and throw it away. So most of the things that we did during this period were very, very manual, where we sent out manual contracts to get people to pay. We had a system where we would have to type in the actual price. And we also spent tons of time just talking to customers one-on-one as we learned. So this is the 0 state of my pricing. So at this time, I was still alone in my room, just trying to figure it out and thinking that it was a math problem. So you'll see here that I built this incredibly time-consuming revenue model that I think has been archived now and was never used. But tried out all of these different pricing units, made tons of assumptions about all the marketing we were going to do around it, and they were all wrong. So the one thing that I did do correctly here was I ran a survey to our current beta testers on Teams to kind of gauge their demand and learn more about the problem that they were having. And what I did was I asked the Van Westendorp questions in that survey, and it was really interesting because at this time I was trying to actually decide between 2 different pricing units, one being a per-seat model and one being a per-1,000 contacts model. So what I did was I A/B tested these 2 models with the users in the survey. And it was really interesting because the answers that I got back for the per contact model in terms of these Van Westendorp questions were actually answers in the form of per seat pricing. So right away we could tell that this per contact model was causing a lot of friction and people didn't understand it to a point where they were trying to give us per seat answers. So that overall did not work out, but the one thing that I did get from that baseline hypothesis was the $14.99 that I used in this new pricing hypothesis I had. And the $14.99 really came from that Van Westendorp model where I found a range that people were willing to pay in, and then I picked a price at random. I said, okay, let's make it $14.99, because we already have a product for individuals that's priced at $9.99. So this seems like a reasonable upgrade. So you can see here that I made quite a few mistakes that I cautioned against in my framework. So one, I went with a freemium model for teams. And I also very much over-engineered the number of plans for teams that I was expecting. So you can see here I have a free plan, I have a paid plan, and then I also have an enterprise plan, which we totally did not have the features to support at the time. The other mistake I also made was not integrating the team plans in with our individual plans. So you can see here that when a customer is actually evaluating FullContact, they're looking at 5 different plans. So that just adds a ton of friction into the process. So we built this one and put it out there, and I emailed all of our beta testers to say, hey, now we're pricing our product. You have a month to decide whether or not you want to pay. And as you can probably tell, I waited for weeks and weeks and weeks, and at the end of it, one of our beta test teams paid. And this taught me a couple really hard lessons. One, if you're going to try and go premium, you should probably go premium first instead of doing freemium, because basically all of our beta test teams had been accustomed to a free product, so it's really hard to convince them that now they should be paying $14.99 for something they had been using already. Also, it was really tough because I was waiting for so long for this feedback. I was burning weeks and weeks just waiting for teams to pay, And in hindsight, we should have just moved to some kind of model immediately where we forced them to make a decision much faster. But due to this freemium model, I was just sitting there twiddling my thumbs, waiting for that one day where more people would start paying for our product. So after a while, I got super, impatient, and decided that we needed to move on as fast as possible. We got to figure out this pricing thing. We got to figure out if Teams is a product worth investing in. So pricing hypothesis number 2 got us much closer to where we wanted to be. So what we did was took down pricing entirely from our marketing site and our product. From now on, whenever you wanted to continue using Teams, you had to talk to one of us on our team. The second thing is we also switched our business model or pricing model to a premium trial instead. So no more freemium product. Anyone who signs up now has to go through a 2-week trial, and at the end of those 2 weeks, they have to make a decision about whether or not they're willing to pay. And this just helped us so much in the long run because it gave us consistent feedback from all of the teams who were starting their trials and really helped us iterate much faster than we did when we were waiting around for the freemium. I cannot emphasize enough how important it was that these teams now went through us to negotiate. If you recall, we were still in such an early state and trying to figure out so many things that talking to customers was the best thing that we could do. And because all these customers had to go through us and tell us about their problem and tell us what they were using already to solve that problem, as well as negotiate a price, we were able to learn so much faster than we did before. But there's one downfall. The team plan still didn't include the individual features. So I still had that huge graph of 4 different plans that people could choose from. And what that actually resulted in when we launched this updated pricing was people started writing into our support team asking what they're supposed to be paying. Are they supposed to be buying 2 different plans? Does one plan include the other? What's going on? And so we found out that this, again, added another point of friction that we needed to solve immediately. What you'll be able to tell from this whole process is I was really nervous about friction and wanted to remove it whenever possible. So gave ourselves a 2 out of 3 for that one and moved on to pricing hypothesis number 3, where we really started humming. So this is where we spent 5 months out of our total 9 months testing pricing. And it was awesome because at this point, a lot of teams were signing up for trials, a lot of teams were expiring out of their trials, and people had started talking to us about what they were willing to pay. And this is the range of prices that we actually negotiated with our teams. And what was really surprising is we found out that people were actually willing to pay within a much smaller range than we thought. So this really helped us hone in on the range at which a product like ours would be natural to price at. And this time, the team plan did include the individual premium features as well. So it's a much easier decision for our teams where they could say, all right, this is one price per seat. I can easily estimate out the cost for my team for a year, and I don't have to do any special math to figure out which features I'm actually getting. So this is where things really started going well. So call that a success because that really got us to a lot more paying teams. After the 5 months were up, we had started noticing that we were getting so much volume that we couldn't handle it anymore. We couldn't sell teams fast enough. And at that point, we had gotten enough paying teams that we could actually decide on a price that we wanted to set and put it out in the world and really bake pricing and billing into the product itself. So what we ended up landing on was a $12.99 per seat for teams, which was well within the range from the slide previous and was actually the sweet spot where most of our teams were paying when they negotiated price with us. We kept the premium trial, and you can see now that our plans are much simpler and way easier to understand. So really learned enough to remove all the friction points during the pricing process, as well as set the right price that people were willing to pay at during this entire process. So chalk that up to a win. And again, when we look at this graph, you can see that at the freemium plan, we had one paying team, and that caused us to really dig in and start figuring out, okay, what do we do next? What can we try next? Like, we really need to figure this out. And then the 14-day trial and the premium negotiated price per seat got us to a good point where we could validate, like, okay, here are the pain points within our current pricing process. All right, let's figure out the right price that people are willing to pay at. And then we were able to take all the learnings from our failed experiments and implement them in a full, self-serve, robust, supportable way at the end of it. So now I'm in the point where I'm in cautious joy, but I know that there's more experiments that we'll have to run as we add new features. So coming back to the things that we're afraid of and the different component parts of pricing, this last one, where there's no way to test pricing on users, is one where you can really take advantage of the contact us method that our sales teams already use and take advantage of. And it really works well for product because we can hide our pricing, we can negotiate it, and we can learn very quickly in a data-driven way. So using this method really helps us out because you don't have to put a price out there right away. You can take it slower, talk to customers, figure out a price that works for them, and then move on from there instead of just doing the Juicero example and putting out your cost and having customers backlash against it. Cool. So after this talk, all of you guys are ready to change your pricing tons of times a day, right? Just kidding. So Price Intelligently, the company that I mentioned before, actually recommends that you look at your pricing and audit your pricing every 6 months. And this just makes it a good habit for us as product managers and UX researchers and designers to get into the habit of reviewing your pricing. You don't necessarily have to change it every 6 months, but it is good to think about, like, hey, what improvements have we made to our product? What extra customer segments have we brought on? Are we at a point where we should review our pricing, and is it okay for us to raise it because we are now adding a lot more value in terms of features? So really just focus on getting into a cadence where you're reviewing this every so often. Cool. So thanks everyone for listening to me today. I really hope that this process and the case study that I gave you guys serves as both a warning and a nice guidance as to different ways that you can test out your pricing, and the fact that pricing really isn't something that you'll get perfect on the first time. And if you think you do, you may spend the rest of your life wondering, like, oh, did I charge too little? Could I have charged more? And there's all this uncertainty around it. So pricing is really just an iterative process focused on learning as you figure out your customer's willingness to pay. So thanks, everyone. Glad to be here.
What music is that? Something to try and make you feel at home.